It's a real honor to be here and see some familiar faces, and I'm kind of humbled by the expertise that we have on hand here today. And some overlap here. I'm not a nutritionist. Obviously, I'm more of a behavior and welfare person, and so some overlap with David's talk, but hopefully some new insights from the Sow point of view. So group housing, obviously, there are some issues here that we need to focus on and tackle, and we certainly don't have all the answers, right? There's clearly some relationships with mortality and culling rates going up in group housing, and we gotta figure our way around this. So I'll be talking about group gestation, relationship to welfare measures, focusing on aggression. What are the best grouping practices? What is the research showing us? Clearly, there's room for more research. I would always say that. But are we mixing early or late? Obviously, in Australia, they've made that decision. It's an early mixing, but we have more freedom here to make those decisions. Static or dynamic grouping. What is the ideal group size, and how can we manage sows differently, and the space requirements? Again, a number of things that David touched on, but I'll get into some of the research out there. Focus on lameness in group housing, monitoring. How are we going to get some metrics on this? I think really we need to do a better job of collecting data on farm, and I know that's not always easy. Our barn staff are always overworked, so hopefully automation can help us there. And also training. Barn staff often don't realize, well, why is it important that I record what a culling decision was, or why I euthanized that animal? Why is that important? Now I've been looking at sow mortality. The records are really not there to get the information. I can't find that information as a researcher in my research herd. I need that information to come from commercial farms. So how can we get better at doing that? And follow up with some take-home messages. So I think we all recognize that removal rates are high and generally increasing as we transition to group gestation. So it's involuntary removals, often of younger animals, and largely due to lameness or reproductive issues, things associated with bringing them into groups, feed competition, aggression. So it's a clear problem and a challenge for our industry. These higher removal rates, sure, there's some clear published data, but it's really not the causation is really not evident. But we do have some really solid data on the incidence of lameness in groups. So there's that very clear effect. A number of studies clearly showing that association. Not too surprising. We mix sows into groups. They're going to establish that social hierarchy, and maybe there's ongoing aggression due to the way we've designed our systems, leading to lameness or loss of pregnancy, and then unplanned culling and euthanasia. So this is our challenge. Research, I'm sure many of you have seen this data coming from multiple herds in the U.S., breaking down the causes of mortality. They were focusing specifically on the pelvic organ prolapse incidence, so that accounted for roughly 21% of mortality on farm. But here we've got lameness and unknown, so 29% removals due to lameness, and 39% unknown. Again, why were those sows removed? If we had better systems, maybe within our software to record these reasons, but clearly, we don't do postmortems on farm typically. This is a huge problem. And certainly, we recognize pelvic organ prolapses is a increasing problem, but it's only one piece of the problem of the puzzle. So welfare and group housing, certainly that was always the idea. We were going to get out and move sows out of stalls. Consumers are demanding it. Retailers are demanding it. Is it going to improve sow welfare? Certainly, as a professor in animal and poultry science, I try to introduce students to animal welfare science. And clearly, it depends on your approach and your perspective on what is animal welfare, right? So David Fraser, a chair in animal welfare at University of British Columbia, has written the book on understanding animal welfare science. So he talks about it in terms of these three perspectives. Is it the affective state, the functional approach to welfare, or is it a natural living? These are three different approaches to understanding animal welfare, right? From a functional approach, I think most of us here are coming from a very functional approach. We're looking at productivity numbers. We're looking at animal health. Those are our key metrics. Stan Curtis, big fan of this approach. And it's the most practical. It's our day-to-day observations of sows in the herd. But if from more of a consumer perspective, we've got natural living. Is the animal able to perform its normal behaviors? Can it move around? Sow is motivated to forage, interact with the herd, social partners, and then again from a more a pet owner, a urban perspective. Is the animal feeling good? How is its affective states, its emotional state? Is it suffering, or is it feeling? Is it living a life worth living? So David Fraser would say that good welfare involves all three perspectives. The animal's feeling well, it's functioning well, and can rely on its natural coping abilities to adapt to the situation. But now with the movement to groups, certainly we can say that we've increased that natural living aspect for the sow. She's got ability, to stand up and turn around and interact with herd mates. We've certainly changed that from stalls to going into a group housing system. So that's where the big change is. So we can certainly say that aspect of welfare has been addressed compared to being in a stall. But what about these other aspects? The functional approach. So we would say productivity, there's some gains and some losses, but overall, production can be certainly as good and possibly better in a well-managed system with group housing. That's got to be our hope and our goal. Health measures, certainly, there's gains and losses there, right? That's what we're talking about. The mortality levels are high, so how do we dig into that and address those problems? We would say, ideally, the affective state. The affective state is going up if sows are well managed and moving around in group gestation. But again, it also depends on the social status of that animal within the group and its ability to access feed. And so, this is where an also a problem area that we need to look into. So welfare, there's great potential in groups for improvement, but these are the areas we're going to focus on. And consumers are demanding these changes, and they have potential to improve the welfare of the sow, but we've got to learn how to get it right. So I think that's one reason why we're all here today. Just some examples of some of these concepts. A really nice study that was done by a PhD student with Yolande Seddon at the Western College of Vet Med in Saskatchewan, Maria Tokareva Here she is walking her sows. She compared stall housing versus group housing and periodic exercise, because our Canadian Code of Practice at one point said that in 2019, you didn't really have to be in group housing, but you had to provide greater freedom of movement, and this could be through periodic exercise. So Maria was a great student to tackle this topic. She did some motivational studies, seeing how much button pressing a sow would do to get out of the stall, and comparing that to how much button pressing she would do to access more feed. And yeah, they wanted to press the button to get out of the stall, but they wanted to press the button more, especially the older, higher parity sows, to get more feed. So yeah, that feeding issue certainly came across clearly, but again, the sows also showed that they wanted to, were motivated to exit the stall. So this, I'm telling you now about her second study. So she followed 180 of our sows at Prairie Swine Center. This picture here shows our free access stall system at Prairie Swine. So she had these 3 treatments. So the control house, control sows were in our free access stalls but locked in. She had exercised sows, so they were locked in the stalls, but then walked once per week for 10 minutes, because we figured this was a level of exercise that was possibly manageable and on a commercial situation. So other studies have looked at giving exercise, but more intense, as you would, like aerobic 3 times a week. But this was what we thought was maybe practical on a commercial level. And then compare that to sows in groups. So the ones that were in groups, they were allowed into the stalls to feed every day, and then locked out of the stalls for the remainder of the day to simulate group housing. And here's, this is Maria walking her sows around the gestation room. So yeah, it was just one parity on these multiple groups. So she did see some differences. I was kind of expecting that there would be no significant results from this study. So kudos to Maria. She did find some significant differences, certainly stereotypy. So this is one of the arguments against stalls, and certainly, bar biting, that sort of thing is not just related to the housing system. It's also that satiety factor, right? You see them bar biting after being fed. So yeah, this is different stages of gestation. Late gestation, everybody was roughly the same in level of stereotypies, but early and mid gestation, the group house sows were performing less bar biting and that sort of oral stereotypies. Throughout gestation, we had increased lying in group house sows. So, and this was particularly in the morning, so the group house sows were feeding and then resting more. So some interesting differences, showing some positive effects of the group situation, and no real effect of that periodic exercise. One really interesting result was with the stillborn piglets, where she found a parity by treatment interaction. So we have younger sows, middle parities, I think that was 2 to 4, and higher parity sows. So a significant reduction in the number of stillborn piglets, both in the exercise and in the group housing situation. And this is actually an effect that we've seen in other studies with early mixing into group gestation, a clear effect on reduction in stillborns. And in the other studies, we also did see reduced stillborns in that early mixing in the younger parity sows too. And yet to really understand the mechanism of that. But I'm sure maybe some of you here might have some thoughts on that. So yeah, overall there were few differences in these treatments, but the group housing did show some clear benefits in the stereotypies, the comfort, lying behavior, stillborns. But overall, yeah, the conclusion here was periodic exercise was very similar to the stalled housing, and really not worth following up in our Canadian Code of Practice. So now we've kind of come up with a 5-year review, and the thought is that we will be transitioning to groups within by 2029. So yeah, just some highlights indicating that we're headed in the right direction, but we've got still a long way to go. So, I saw that Trevor DeVries is on our program tomorrow talking about connections with dairy cattle research, which is very helpful. Here's a bit of a lesson from the layer hen industry. They've also seen this transition from cage systems to large aviaries and furnished cage systems. So this paper by Chuck Payne came out last year. And so not too surprisingly, they did this transition away from cages, and they also found increased mortality levels after that transition to alternative systems, right? So this study is a meta-analysis of the mortality levels followed in 6,040 commercial flocks, so a considerable sample size. And each year of experience with that alternative system resulted in a 0.4 to 0.6% drop in mortality. So as producers became more familiar with how to manage these systems, that mortality level dropped, and that's what I'm hoping we're also going to see in our industry as we transition to groups, right? That's hopefully something that we can replicate in a future study. So yeah, hopefully Canada and other countries can get this right. So today I'm asked to speak about aggression. So they're basically, we talk about it in two major areas, that initial mixing aggression, so sows establishing their social status, that dominance hierarchies. There's a range of figures out there of how long it takes them to set up a stable group, but Mays et al. Paper said 2 to 10 days, but certainly, there can be some carryover. So this is, typically that one-on-one combat, head knocks, parallel and inverse parallel pressing. We've all seen that, I'm sure. And as David was mentioning, the goal is to drive that subordinate animal away. It needs to have that distance, suitable distance or something to get away from the aggressor, and that is how the aggression will ideally end. But without that space, then it continues and is more persistent and damaging. But then we've got the ongoing and competitive aggression that occurs throughout gestation, and obviously is going to vary depending on the system and feeding level. So sows continue to compete for whatever resources are in the pen, usually primarily, the EASF feeder. They might be hanging out in front of it and dominating access to it. Megan Strawford, master's student at University of Saskatchewan with Harold Gonyu. She was one of the first to really establish that feeding order in the ESF system is related to the social rank of the sows, not too surprising. But they also competing over the comfortable lying areas with the pen, and so maybe not as intense aggression as the original mixing aggression, sometimes referred to as an avoidance order, because they don't have to necessarily interact. It might just be a dirty look from a sow, and they move on, and so not overt aggression sometimes. So factors affecting aggression. Of course, there are multitude. Do we do early or late mixing? Is that going to influence aggression? The dynamic or static grouping systems? What is the space allowance or the group size? the feeding system, obviously, the diet, satiety, fiber, tryptophan has been tried, serotonin precursor. What is the ideal design of the pen? Parity groupings, we just spoke about that. Mixing strategies. So yeah, it's a bit of a mess. It's, stall housing is so simple by comparison, right? We can all understand how that works, but we get into all these questions about group gestation, and as I say, we don't have all the answers yet. So something we're still working on. So early or late mixing, certainly that critical period. I won't belabor this because David covered it pretty well. So 2 to 4 weeks of pregnancy, we've got implantation and the maternal recognition of the pregnancy. So ideally we're gonna possibly mix them at weaning. That would be an interesting approach. Certainly not common here in North America, but certainly that first week after insemination becomes very attractive, or else we're going to wait after implantation is done. Studies on early or late mixing, certainly there's some evidence that there is more aggression when sows are mixed early before implantation. There's this study by Stevens et al. Mixing that 1 week after insemination, there were more injuries, skin lesions versus 5 or 6 week mixing. Another Rob Knox's paper here, early mixing at day 3 increased lameness and decreased conception rates and also farrowing rates in that study done in Illinois. And then Strawford and Knox found similar levels of regression mixing 2 to 9 days versus 35 to 46. So, a mixture of studies. We say early mixing is bad, or no difference. No clear evidence, I think, that it's a real problem, and certainly can save in terms of barn space and the reduced number of breeding stalls or stalls we need to have in a farm. So, can be a good use of space if you're doing a transition. So Mays would say that the type of the group housing system, individual characteristics of management are influential here. So either approach can be used. And again, as with so many things here, it's not what you do, it's how you do it, right? So that's we got to get into those nitty-gritty details because many of these options are okay, and there's not a huge amount of impact, but how you do it is important, right? Static or dynamic groups. A lot of farms are going to dynamic mixing, and I think maybe here the word is still out. Again, it's largely how we do it. Dynamic mixing can certainly give you a lot of flexibility for group management, use of space, large pens. You're not wasting barn space on alleyways. You can also maximize your ESF use. But that repeated grouping has always been a concern, right? You're throwing new groups and adding to that mixing stress. So I think I would. David was saying, the smaller group that's being mixed in there are receiving less aggression, especially if they're introduced properly and you have a reasonable lump of a group that's being added at once. What is the research saying? This 2016 study came out of Belgium. So they compared actually 10 herds with static and dynamic mixing systems in Belgium. They did find higher lameness scores and lesions in the dynamic group versus static at the end of gestation. So the levels were lower at the end of gestation, but they were higher in the dynamic group. But at the mixing event, they didn't find any significant differences. So that's important to note. Yushi Lee and Harold Ganyu, 2013 paper. The dynamic group there had increased chronic skin injuries, so throughout gestation, and lameness compared to static, so an impact of that dynamic grouping. And then a paper from the US, Anil, the dynamic groups had, again, greater skin injuries versus static, but there was no effect on cortisol levels and no effect on performance. So again, moderate impact. So clearly we might say, yeah, there seems to be a higher potential for injury in a dynamic system. I think some of that's going to depend on the flooring and, again, the level of competition among sows. But yeah, a number of authors have emphasized that, yeah, the outcome really depends on a lot of other factors, right? A study by Payam, lameness prevalence, there was no difference in their study between the two different grouping styles. Basically, yeah, their observation was there's higher levels of lameness in group housing overall, independent of the grouping system. Megan Verdon in Australia concluded that there was not enough evidence to show that sow welfare was affected by dynamic grouping. So again, inconclusive. And at Prairie Swine Center, yeah, we've just spent a year implementing this in our research barn. Very challenging, trying to implement both static and dynamic systems and a control with a 28-day mixing. So yeah, with our small herd, it took us over a year of data collection, and we're almost done with a very good master's student. But yeah, we've got, of course, the production data is already there with our 25 sows per pen. It was actually quite surprising, lower conception rates, lower farrowing rates in the static groups compared to dynamic. So yeah, again, it goes back to David's comment, when you're mixing that large group, there's so much acute aggression within the whole group, whereas within our smaller groups, we were adding 8 sows to a pen of 25, so removing 8 and adding 8. So roughly a third of the group was being replaced. And yeah, the stable sows were there, and then the next group came in. Certainly, yeah, there was some aggression, but yeah, it was the static group that really suffered in performance. So we're keen to get some of that data out. Space allowance. Again, another important area where I don't think we really have the final answer yet. David was talking about 1.8 to 2.4 meters squared, and certainly, yeah, that appears to be the ballpark, right? And certainly, again, looking at the research, again, it depends on. We've got a range of different space allowances, but everybody's kind of looking at this range, low end of like 1.4 is the lowest, but yeah, 1.5 to over 3 meters squared. Multiple different feeding systems that were represented here in the research, different grouping sizes. But yeah, a range of results. So the effect of increasing space in the Hemsworth study, increased farrowing rate with increasing space, reduced feeding aggression, reduced cortisol, so positive effects there of increasing space allowance. The Lori Mack study, no difference on productivity or time out of stalls in a free access system. So really no effect of space allowance there, negative or positive. Payam cell found that with increasing space, reduction in lameness, Yushi Lee, increased lameness. So again, some differences, but again, it depends on the activity level of the animals, your flooring conditions, and then a more recent 2007, yeah, floor-fed study, increased lameness with increasing space allowance, but with five sows per group. So, yeah, it's really hard to interpret that data and compare it across different studies, but I think we can say that we really need to focus on the pen design, not just focus on that space allowance per se. And anyone who's done space allowance studies, yeah, you've got to either change the size of the pen or you've got to change the size of the group. So there's always going to be an interaction with either pen size or group size. So even that research is complicated with multiple factors. So looking at pen design specifically, we have a study, Australian study by Barnett. So they had a rectangular pen versus a square pen, and clearly showed that aggression was reduced in that rectangular pen. And again, this goes back to that flight distance. If in a rectangular pen there's a longer longitudinal distance, so sows can get away from each other. And a more recent study was showing that flight distance after defeat is roughly 50 meters if you can get that far away, or say get around the corner. If you have obstructions in the pen, you can dampen the aggression. But yeah, again, a lot of these studies are complex, and they need to ideally be performed over multiple parities, right? So we don't often have the liberty to follow sows for that length of time in a research study. And clearly, as we recognize that there are genetic differences here, but very, very difficult to study. You know, how many barns have multiple genotypes? We can speculate on that, but very little published work. Just something to think about when we're selecting animals. Grouping by parity, again, I would agree with David's comment earlier. Segregating our gilts is the primary benefit of segregated housing. So yeah, if we have mixed parities, obviously there's going to be a more defined social rank. Sows can praise one another based on the body size, right, and avoid the big sows. The big sows are going to be older and dominant generally. And then we've got our lower parity, and then the gilts are at the bottom end. So yeah, mixed parity, the gilts are the ones to be suffering. And whereas in a uniform group, certainly we're going to see reduced skin lesions, observations of more frequent fights. Certainly the young gilts are often pretty scrappy. I watched video for aggression. It's like, why are they causing so much trouble? But yeah, it's often less intense fighting, but they're just testing out the waters. So yeah, certainly when there's segregation, we do see higher farrowing rates. And in parity 1 sows, another study by UC Lee, and also, some unpublished data at Prairie, from Prairie Swine Center done in Illinois, again, confirmed that higher back fat at lower parities when gilts were separate. I only have one slide on nutrition here, and luckily it's fairly general, but just the idea of certainly aggression is related to satiety, and so I'm really pumped that nutrition is looking at fiber, and I really think this is a big solution for the problem we've got. We estimate now that sows are generally 50% feed restricted. You know, they would like to eat 50% again over what we're feeding them, right? Ulcers are a big problem. Stomach torsion still an issue. The word hangry, they're hangry for a large part of the day. Some studies at Prairie Swine Center showed at least 20 hours a day they're highly motivated for feed, and that's a big part of the day. So obviously we're moving in the direction of increasing that satiety level by using fiber, soluble and insoluble fiber. It's still a mystery to me, but certainly, yeah, the idea of gut fill, and then also the idea of improved gut health. I think EU has gone in the right direction by mandating some fiber levels, but obviously we need to understand the impact better of different sources of fiber. So yeah, I think it's a very positive direction. But clearly, yeah, somebody mentioned increased feeding time, so that's definitely part of it. If we were delivering it in an ESF system, can we still feed everybody in a day? I think so, but maybe we can provide fiber. I know some European farms are providing fiber in a hopper ad lib outside of the feeder, so that's not going to take away from time in the ESF. Certainly, Western Canada biosecurity and North America in general is a big issue, but grain comes from fields also, so we've just got to find the right sources and ensure that they're processed in a way that they're acceptable to come into on farm. Yeah, so we've got increased feed volume, so you got to have a bigger hoppers, and sows are going to need more time to consume it. There might be increased manure volume, potential for increased greenhouse gases. Certainly, I know that's the case in dairy, but Denise Beaulieu at the University of Saskatchewan did a couple of studies and found no increase in greenhouse gases with the addition of fiber. So again, the answer's still uncertain there, but yeah, I'm excited because this is really going to be helpful for reducing aggression, I think, in the long term and improving the welfare of our sows. So getting on, looking at some of the other mixing strategies that are out there to reduce aggression initially. So we've seen with dynamic groups, you might use pre-mixing pens. David had a slide with mentioned hog-tied farms. So that's one of the farms I visited numerous times in southern Ontario, hog-tied farms. So John Van Engelen is using pre-mixing pens for his dynamic group, and yeah, finds it's working very well. In a static group, you might have a separate mixing pen. So you might have better flooring, higher space allowance as you mix the group, and then you move them to a gestation pen once that initial aggression is sorted out. So those are two really good approaches, but of course, involving more barn infrastructure, more room, more moving sows around, but certainly positive results there. A number of studies have looked at presence of a boar or vasectomized boar perhaps being brought into the group to reduce that social aggression among sows, use of different smells to mask individual scents or pheromones to increase acceptance of other sows. Another approach has been to mix late in the day. Maybe they'll just settle down and lie down. But yeah, these first two, I would say, very promising results, and certainly a good direction to head to in order to reduce some of that mixing aggression. But yeah, positive results, negative results, no difference with these other approaches, and generally the observation is that it just kind of delays the aggression. But certainly, yeah, feeding level is another item that I didn't mention here, and that is another positive approach, right? Make sure that sows are well fed. I got 10 minutes here, so let's... So pre-mixing pens, certainly, yeah, there are some studies on using those pre-mixing pens, and so these sows were allowed to interact after weaning, so during that breeding phase, 7 days prior to being moved into a larger group. They spent more time inactive and more time in lying in proximity to other sows than unmixed sows. So unmixed sows weren't allowed to interact, and so when they were mixed, certainly more aggression and then more activity in general, and then a longer duration of aggression after mixing. So those pre-mixing pens definitely seem to have a benefit. So another area I'm going to speak about, and perhaps fairly quickly is on lameness. So clearly that's a major cause of removals by culling and euthanasia. So it's easier to observe and record, certainly, than aggression. You know, if you're going to study aggression, I've got to videotape sows. I don't have a artificial intelligence that is capable of measuring aggression just yet, but I know people are working on it. We do have a lot of research on lameness, the prevalence and associated factors. And again, this is informed, our solutions are often informed by dairy cattle research, although, we can't implement some of the things that you can use with dairy cattle. Sows are a little bit more going to interact with their environment and manipulate it. So we'll talk briefly here about measuring lameness, identifying those affected animals, and then how do we treat them? I'll focus on flooring, and then, obviously genetics is an issue there too. So why are we measuring lameness? So we can, ideally, if we can identify it early on, and we had some idea of what to do about it, that's often the problem. What are we going to do? So we can try apply treatments proactively, and then also for benchmarking. You know, when is it a problem? Where is it a problem? What stage in your production system is it a problem? And ideally, there would be some specific time point within the barn when you're going to be evaluating sows, whenever they're moving, say to farrowing or into breeding. During gestation and lactation, if you're getting them up. So normal weight bearing. We got to try and think of the weight bearing capacity of the sow, and with most other farm animals. I'm working with horses too. They're carrying the majority of their weight on their front legs, right? That's where they're designed. Those pillars holding up the body. So when lameness occurs, obviously they're going to bear less weight on that affected limb, and then there's increased load bearing on the contralateral limb. So right, the table is shifting in the other direction. And it's like if you have a table with a short leg, and then they're just looking at the sow herself. So she's got robust front legs to hold her up, but we're making her longer, and we're filling her full of lots of pigs. So where's the problem? It's going to be in the hind end. It's like, they're getting late in gestation, and they're really having trouble getting up. And we got to find, using straps in our barn or whatever, help them, because that seems to be the weakest part, and we need to do more work on that. So measuring lameness, the most simple approach, obviously, is a visual assessment. It's easily applied on a farm. But these are subjective scores. So if you look at the research, certainly there's a high variability. Inter-observer reliability isn't great. But within a farm, certainly this is the way to go. A review here by Nalon, working with Nicholas Develer. Very nice review in 2013. Showed there's a lot of systems out here for visual assessment, 3 to 9 categories. We've used at Prairie Swine the ZinPro scale. It's 0 to 3, so 4 categories. Pretty evident from a sow who's moving easily and fluidly down to a score of 3, where a reluctance to bear weight. She's not really getting around or barely able to get up, and the stages in between. So, it's a balance. Right, 5 minutes. Obviously there's other approaches to measuring lameness. From a scientific perspective, we want more quantitative methods, and I think with automation we might have some answers here going forward. A lot of research now looking at kinematics or pressure mats. You could look at accelerometers, so they've been widely used, looking at the postures of the sows, latency to lie after feeding, weight distribution using a force plate. Certainly when I was looking at ESF feeder in Spain a few years ago, there was a weigh scale in the ESF feeder, but to measure lameness, you would need that 4 plates in the ESF feeder. Again, expensive, but what would provide information not only on the sow weight, but on her weight distribution and lameness. And now we've got pressure mats as another technology, but again, that's more for a research setting. The speed of the animal moving across the surface is going to influence the measures. So, and then another one suggested is stepping or weight shifting, again, that can be picked up in a scale. So yeah, the force plate does seem to be one of the more promising technologies out there. So treating lameness, certainly in Canada, we've got NSAIDs, meloxicam, ketoprofen coming more into use now that we've got pain control at castration. Having adequate comfort pens for poor doing sows, certainly time in a stall or using a rubber mat. More emphasis now on hoof lesions and hoof care. But yeah, let's look into flooring a little bit here. Not a lot of research out there, but on slat and gap width, what is the abrasiveness? So wearing the hoof versus slipperiness of the floor. And yeah, I had a question about waffle slats. Any producers here use waffle slats? No, I don't see anyone. But yeah, there's no research on the waffle slats specifically, but certainly something of interest in terms of leg health. Bedded pens, that's clearly been shown to reduce lameness, improve leg health, and reduce aggression. We've got that satiety factor. So certainly possible options for bedded pens in the future, something to think about. So I think I'm coming to the end of my talk here, so I'll just try and quickly wrap up. Some flooring research has been done here in Canada. Nicholas Devler, in collaboration with Laurie Connor at University of Manitoba, looking at slat and gap widths, using a kinematic setup there, comparing it to moving sows on a solid flooring system, different slat and gap widths, and then also a longer-term comparison of 2 flooring designs through 2 parities. So often people are wondering, are sows going to move? Do they want to move with the slats or against them? So their results clearly showed that sows want to move more normally when they're perpendicular to the slat direction. And then depending on the slat and gap width, they had better movement with the larger the slats and the smaller gap widths. And certainly, yeah, the EU recommendation of 20 millimeters seems to be better than higher gap widths. Unfortunately, at Prairie Swine Center, we've got over an inch gap width, and that's been an ongoing issue for our gestation herd. Part 2 study, certainly they found reduced hoof lesions and greater comfort, so lying with normal lying behavior with a smaller gap width. And no effect on reproduction or back fat. But again, it was a small number of sows over 2 parities. So again, yeah, you need higher numbers to actually see good differences here. And again, yeah, no impact here on manure management. Again, that was another consideration for cleanliness and air quality. Other solutions for lameness, certainly, and management, diets directed towards gilt development. So as a nutritionist, I'm sure many of you are focused on this area, developing healthy sows that are going to have longevity, not just feeding a grow-finish diet, as was done in the past. And the flooring types, can you manage flooring systems? Scraping floors, Nobody wants to do that. Use of drying powders in high-risk areas, say when sows are being mixed. And then also other management solutions like early mixing, early socialization of piglets so that they learn to socialize at an early age. Certainly a lot of evidence there, but little implementation on commercial practice. And clearly, more selection for leg and foot conformation and movement. And I kind of overlapping here, but I would recommend a review that was done at our 5-year Code of Practice review here in Canada, a summary that was written up by Madalena Peterson-McNabb and working with Yolande Seddon, progress made towards the animal welfare research priorities for pigs review. A very detailed review that they did of current research on group housing and solutions. So trying to wrap up here, I think it's very, very promising, the potential for group housing with automated feeding. If we can implement automation for heat detection, lameness detection, if we could identify lameness early and provide treatment, perhaps NSAIDs, and AI here, artificial intelligence. We've been working now recently with One Cup AI. They've got artificial intelligence that does individual recognition on beef cattle, and now they're trying to apply this artificial intelligence learning to sow or pigs and pig behavior. I hope that in the future we'll have technologies that can certainly help us and help the farm managers become more specialized, right? Take care of a lot of some of the chore work, but again, we need those people who can do this work, and so that is an ongoing challenge I think we all recognize. I would emphasize that we really need to improve our farm record keeping and be more consistent across the industry, say benchmarking sow removal and related lameness, especially in Canada here as we're seeing this transition to group housing being implemented. Now is the time to be watching what changes and what is impacted, and so we can identify best practices and implement those things in real time instead of waiting and reading about it later about the things that went wrong. I think Australia was certainly pressured into going whole hog and making the big change so quickly. How are we going to? We need to balance automation and the labor demands, and then get better information in real time to help our management. So we need that data to understand our grouping and best practices, and focus on the barn design, the flooring systems. We really need some new work on flooring systems. Do we laminate rubber to the floor? How do we provide a rubber floor or a better floor to pigs without them ripping it up? And then, thinking about the workers in these barns, because if we can't maybe raise the level of work in a pig barn, it's going to be a zero-sum game, right? We need good people to do this work, I think I'll leave it at that and just make some acknowledgements to the funding from Government of Saskatchewan and our provincial pork organizations across Canada, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Canada's MyTax program, Prairie Swine Centre barn staff, and our students. And here's my E-team, ethology team during COVID, and then more recently as we were wrapping up our recent study. So acknowledge those people and be happy to take any questions. Thanks.